Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Sonic the Hedgehog 2, brought to us by Sega. Of course, the follow-up to the original Sonic the Hedgehog, and personally my favorite Sonic game of all time. The game introduced a lot of new features to Sonic, gave us the Spin Dash, Miles Tails Prower as Sonic's companion, as well as a two-player option. Even though the versus mode may not be the greatest, it was still fun to play against friends. Without further ado though, here we go with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Sega Genesis. In this run, I will be getting all the Chaos Emeralds, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of a sporadic path through the first handful of levels to make sure I have enough rings in order to do the bonus game. Similar to Sonic 1, you have to have 50 rings in order to access the bonus game, but instead of getting there at the end of an act, instead you hit one of those checkpoint markers, and if you have 50 rings, a little circle will start rotating around it in stars, and if you jump into that, you'll be transported to one of the mini-games. There are 7 bonus levels to complete, and if you're able to complete each one of them, you'll get a Chaos Emerald at the end of each, and getting all of them will grant you the ability to turn into Super Sonic. These minigames or bonus levels to get the Chaos Emeralds are a spot of contention for some. I've never been a big fan, and I've never been the best at them, but I've definitely gotten better at them as years have gone by. What makes them difficult is you have a very strict limit that you have in order to get enough rings to complete each goal. Each of these levels are broken up into 3 segments. You have to have a certain number of rings at the end of each segment in order to continue on. At the end of the 3rd segment, if you have enough rings at that point, you will get the Chaos Emerald. If you end up failing, you will get another chance to do it if you're able to get another 50 rings and get another one of the checkpoints. And you can keep trying it as many times as need be, as long as there's more checkpoints and enough rings in order to do so. The camera perspective and graphics were fantastic for its time. It always had a really cool look to it, and the whole game has unbelievably amazing music that's just absolutely iconic. One thing though I highly recommend for those who've never been the best at this, you want to play the game with just Sonic, instead of having Tails and Sonic in these. Basically, Tails can also collect rings, and he goes along the same time as Sonic, the same path, but he's a little bit delayed, and because of this, Tails will go a couple of seconds after you do, and he will a lot of times end up running into hazards that you're just barely dodging yourself, and he'll end up losing the rings. So it's best to just be Sonic by himself, and thankfully you can actually do this in the options menu and play as either just Tails or just Sonic. Either way, as long as it's just one character involved, you're good. What's cool though is you can actually have a second player control Tails for you, so if you have a friend, they can help you and makes the minigames even easier as long as you're both pretty skilled at being able to collect enough rings during the minigame. One thing that stinks is after you complete one of these, you lose all the rings that you spent in order to get into the bonus game, so you have to be very careful when you come out of these games so that you don't accidentally run into an enemy since you won't have any rings to protect you. After collecting a whole bunch more rings, I'm going to backtrack a little bit into the level and get to another one of these checkpoints so I can get another Chaos Emerald. My goal is usually to try to get all of the Chaos Emeralds before I get too far into the game, just to make things a little bit easier. If you hit every checkpoint and know where they all are and can get all the rings, you can actually get Super Sonic pretty quickly in the game. Each one of these bonus games gets increasingly more difficult in order to get a hold of the rings and be able to keep a hold of them as you get farther in. There's a whole bunch of different patterns that you also have to slowly learn as you do it. They are the same every time you play, so the more you practice, the more you eventually get used to where the rings are coming and which direction you'll need to put Sonic in order to grab them. You have stuff like these big ring circles, basically, where you have a series of rings that are set up in a circle pattern that you can kind of grab. If you just time it right, you can get a lot of them when going in the circle. You always want to try to have as many rings as possible going between the different gates. So if you already have close to the amount you need for the 3rd gate after the 2nd gate, you're pretty good. Because you're not sure always exactly, especially if you're doing it for the first time or you don't practice a whole lot, how many rings you're going to possibly be able to get during that 3rd and final segment. Early on, it's pretty easy to actually have a lot of access rings going into the final segment, but that gets a lot harder, of course, as we make it farther. Another one of the big changes from Sonic 2 compared to Sonic 1 is instead of having 3 acts for every level and then the boss fight at the end of the 3rd act, you instead only have 2, except for the end of the game, where Metropolis Zone ends up having 3 acts, as well as then there's a couple of levels that are just by themselves, leading to the very end of the game and the final boss encounter. After getting 2 of the Chaos Emeralds, we finish up Emerald Hill Zone 1 and move on to Zone 2 here, where I'm going to try to do my best to get a couple more of the Chaos Emeralds throughout here. Similar to Sonic 1, but much more available in Sonic 2, a lot of levels have multiple paths, top paths and lower paths, and different areas you can go to and access to make each level have a lot of different areas that you could see. You can play the game multiple times and see different areas of levels each time you end up playing, which I thought was always one of the great cool things about Sonic 2, making it so replayable, besides the fact that it has fantastic gameplay and music. Dropping down here, after getting enough rings, we're going to enter our 3rd bonus game for the 3rd Chaos Emerald. This is where the difficulty starts to ramp up a little bit for these bonus games. We have to get 60 rings right from the get-go here, a whole bunch in the center before some mines end up showing up. Be careful and just start to kind of get used to jumping over the mines or quickly getting out of the way. This is also a good idea to start getting used to grabbing as many as you can and not have to rely so much on Tails, because as you can see, he immediately ended up losing the rings that he ended up gathering, but there's still plenty for me to grab. I love like where it's consecutive rings right after one another that go in a very small line, and I love being able to grab all of them while doing that. It's very satisfying, I have to say, when you're able to get as many rings as possible during these bonus games, even if they can be hair-pullingly frustrating on certain ones, especially the later ones. Here I love this kind of jump rope mentality we have, where we grab a whole bunch of rings coming directly at us and then have to time it nicely so we're able to jump over the mines, and if you do it right, you'll be able to grab quite a lot of them during this. Just have to be careful of a few giant rings of mines here near the end of this segment, but we have plenty of rings to finish it. The hardest thing to do in these segments is when you have these kind of like arrow, big triangle-like things of rings, it's hard to grab as many as possible during that segment. Of course, you want to try to be in the middle of them if you want to grab as many as possible, or if you do like a quick zigzag pattern in those triangle-like segments, you can get a decent amount of rings. It's also with those kind of formations of the rings where I find that Tails ends up grabbing a lot and ends up being more of a detriment to me. Once we're back in the level, do our best to try to get as many rings as we can and get another Chaos Emerald bonus game before we end up getting to the boss battle, the first boss battle of Sonic 2. There's only 7 Chaos Emeralds, so having 4 before we're even out of the first zone is definitely a plus. I always love the graphics of having Sonic being able to go through those like spinning spiral-like areas. Just really cool kind of effect that really impressed me as a kid back in the day. Now onwards to the 4th Chaos Emerald bonus game. This one requires us to get 40 rings right from the very start. It's pretty easy to get those 40 rings right away, but then you have a series of mines that you'll have to dodge throughout the rest of that first area, so be careful after getting the 40 rings that you're able to hold on to them. The second segment has us getting 100 rings. You'll have a whole bunch of mines, once again, still kind of coming at you in these big, like, C patterns, basically a big opening that you'll be able to sneak on through while trying to dodge a whole bunch of them. Some of the hardest ones to dodge, and this one introduces it, is these, where you have mines in the direct center that come at you at a consistent pace, and you have to kind of go back and forth from the left and right sides in order to keep a hold of the rings. As you can see here, Tails ended up having a few rings, runs right into one of those mines as I'm moving back and forth, and ends up losing a few, but thankfully I'm able to have enough in order to keep on going here. Thankfully, even with Tails getting a hit here and ended up losing those couple of rings, I'm still able to once again be able to pick up the slack and get enough rings to finish up and get our 4th Chaos Emerald here. Back into Emerald Hill now, we are at the end of the stage. No more rings to grab right there. I could have gone back a little bit and grabbed some, but thankfully the first boss is extremely easy. Got the Robotnik in this vehicle. I'm actually going to start off by hitting him by doing a spin dash near the end, near the tires. You can actually hit him that way. You have to be careful doing the spin dash at him during this because you can still go a little bit too far into him and end up running into the drill at the front of the vehicle. Just like with Sonic 1, after 8 hits, Robotnik is defeated. We'll hit the capsule, and we're moving on to the next zone of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Chemical Plant Zone is one of the most memorable, I think, of all the levels in Sonic 2. It's also a pretty difficult stage in comparison to the Emerald Hill Zone that we just ended up completing. Both acts of Chemical Plant Zone have a variety of different paths that you're able to take through large portions of the level. The path that I'll be taking is a little bit more of the unconventional route, I guess, through this. But I guess either way, as long as you're able to get through the stage, you're pretty good. There's a lot of hazards you have to deal with, including the chemicals basically being shot out of, like the cannon-like tubes going up and down in areas. You have the weird enemies that open up and end up firing out projectiles, and you can only attack them when they're closed up. They appear on like the walls like this one, or on the ceiling, or ground level. Bit of an annoyance. You have the spiders that will grab you, and after a few seconds they'll explode if you're unable to escape from them. The path that I end up taking through this, I end up not doing any of the bonus rounds. It just ended up being a very easy path through Chemical Plant 1, but I'll try to hit one as I go into Chemical Plant 2. Chemical Plant 2 starts off pretty similarly to the first, but ends up having a pretty difficult end part, or at least considering we're still pretty early in the game. I always thought, for whatever reason, that Chemical Plant should have maybe been a little bit farther into the game than the second level, because it ends up being a bit difficult to get through. There's a part at the end that you can end up getting trapped and die, and have Sonic ended up drowning. I'm sure I'm not the only kid that ended up dying at that spot a couple of times during my childhood. There's just so many awesome like tube structures and all, and you can really get like sense of speed in Sonic 2, much more so, I feel like, than any part of Sonic 1. There's the boosts like this that really get a ton of speed as Sonic blasts through a whole series of areas. After running down this big ramp and doing a couple of spins, I'm going to stop here on this platform to hit this checkpoint marker so we can get another one of the Chaos Emerald bonus games. For the 5th of the Chaos Emerald bonus games, we start off with having to get 55 rings. Gotta love the orange and green color scheme that's going on for this one. It's a little bit difficult because you have a lot of the triangle-like patterns for a bunch of the ring formations right away, so you have to kind of do a little bit of a weaving pattern to make sure that you're able to hit as many as possible. This can be difficult, and Tails usually ends up picking up quite a bit, especially during the beginning segment here. Try to get as many as I can to make sure I hit the goal, even if Tails ends up getting hit. For the second set, we need to get 110 rings here. More of the triangle pattern to start off, but then you have to do this weird kind of pattern. It starts off by kind of just doing a little bit like half circle and then come back and then does a full circle. Doing a nicely timed rotation around the entire playfield will get you a lot of the rings, but it can still be difficult, and you don't have long. You don't have a whole lot of sets here, so you have to be very careful to make sure you get enough. You then have to get 200 rings after that, though. This final segment can be brutal because you have to get so many rings and they're kind of spread out with those triangle patterns, so hopefully you've gotten pretty good at being able to do that while going through. Here at the end, we have to grab a bunch of them while they're flying in the air. Instead of just going all the way over with max momentum, you want to go most of the way and then stop. That way you kind of stop dead right in between the big group of them, and as you fall, you'll be able to grab more instead of just going all the way around. Also, my strategies may not even end up being the best for this. I've never been fantastic at the bonus games, but I have gotten at least a little bit better as the years have gone on. For the next part of this level, we have to be very careful on these moving platforms. You can drop on down and go to the very edge here in order to grab an extra life, which is always very useful. We'll then go back to where we were and then use the riding platforms to get across the water. Just want to make sure you don't end up falling down into those spikes there. Though Tails usually does a good job of falling into the spikes for you. After dashing all the way to the right here, this is that chamber that if you can get out of it quickly, you're fine, but it fills up with water, and if you fall and have to keep trying to go back upwards, you can end up having Sonic drown. There's no bubbles during that in order to replenish Sonic's oxygen, which can be difficult. Here we end up dropping down. Thankfully this set of platform is here, and as it rises up we'll be able to jump out of the water, and this leads us to the battle here against Robotnik. Be careful of the left and right sides that end up falling away, and if you time it though, you can bounce all of the hits off of Robotnik before he even fires out any of his weapon. His weapon is a water droplet that will come out of the contraption and drop on the platform you are, causing a splash effect that can end up hitting you. And while of course it'll damage you and knock your rings out, more importantly, it usually ends up knocking you backwards into one of the two openings on the left or right side. So I try to take out Robotnik as fast as possible. You also want to make sure that you jump off of Robotnik on the safe landing before you end up defeating him. So when you hit that last hit, make sure you land safely, or else you can still end up dying even if Robotnik is defeated. Next up is Aquatic Ruin Zone. Here I like the music, but I've never been the biggest fan of the level. One reason is for not only being a water-based level, which even though I like them usually in a lot of platformers, never been a huge fan of them in Sonic, mostly because of course of the drowning scenario. But the fly enemies have always been a nuisance to me, and I always usually end up getting hit by one or two every time I end up playing the game. Thankfully, I'm able to keep enough rings though when I make it to the checkpoint and make it into the 6th of the Chaos Emerald bonus games. Lots of easy to grab rings that come kind of straight at you. If you get right in the center, you can grab both the left and right sides of these sets of rings to get a huge amount of them very early on. Just have to be careful to watch out for a few mines that are throughout this area. At the end of the area, you have this really cool part where the rings kind of go around the mines, and I love that. Like I said before, it's just very satisfying being able to go in a straight line and getting as many rings as possible while dodging the stuff here, though Tails won't really be able to do it very well. Next segment has us trying to get only 140 rings. It isn't too much of a big spike compared to the first set. However, the third part has a ton of rings, so you want to make sure you get as many as possible during this segment. You have this big set of rings, as you can see, you can kind of go around all the way and be able to get quite a lot in a big circle, which is fun to do. Just want to make sure you grab as many as you possibly can. While we end up having easily enough in order to get the 140 goal, we now have to get 220 for the third and final gate here. Tails doesn't help us out and ends up getting hit right from the very get-go, which pretty much makes it just up to Sonic here now for us to grab the rest of the rings. Trying to grab as many of the kind of sets as you can see by getting in the center and grabbing all of them if possible as they're coming towards us. As you can see, they give you a decent amount of rings coming your way, but even with so many, I'm still barely able to get 220 in order to finish it up and grab the 6th Chaos Emerald. We now have only one more left to get. Once we're back in the level, thankfully there's one of the TVs, the boxes right next to us, and we can grab a set of 10 rings so that we have a good amount going through the rest of the level. Introduced in Sonic 2 is also the speed shoes, which allow us to go really fast for a period of time. I also love the fact that the music speeds up whenever you end up grabbing one of these. Here, throughout the rest of the level, I take the upper path so I never have to end up dropping down into the water below and finish up Act number 1. Now on to Act 2. At the very beginning, I take my time because I want to try to get on the swinging platforms here. Instead of dropping directly down to the water, I can take these to get up to the top portion here. This allows me to take a little bit of an easier path. Anytime I don't have to deal with the water, the better, pretty much. There is a checkpoint marker there, but I don't have enough rings, so we're just going to continue on through the stage, and then I lose all my rings by running into that grinder enemy right there. Well, I can continue on to the right here. I'm going to try to jump up here and go to the left, and this will allow me to get a few more rings along this way and take a slightly different path through the stage. I feel like this is the kind of part of the level that a lot of people don't end up seeing because they usually end up dropping down into the water below, but like I said, I prefer not to, so I'm going to take the upper path here. I love the braking effect of these columns as you jump up and destroy them as they pop out of the ground. Watching out for some more of those bug guys. I hate those flies. They are one of the most annoying enemies ever. I make it to the end of the stage. I don't end up getting enough rings to get another one of the Chaos Emerald bonus games, but for the Robotnik boss here, you have the left and right totems that you can jump on, and then jump on to Robotnik from there. If you're on the ground level, you can use the arrows that he ends up hitting using his hammer, and use them to climb back on top of the totem in order to hit Robotnik. The hammer will hit you and end up damaging you if it comes crashing down while you're still on whatever totem it's coming down on, so be careful of that. But we finish up the stage and move on to my absolute favorite Sonic 2 level, and my favorite classic Sonic level of all time, Casino Night. Casino Night Zone is easily my favorite, and I blame it for partly why I've always loved Las Vegas and casinos and slot machines. In fact, the slot machine included in this is always a lot of fun to play, and I would spend a lot of time just doing the slot machine over and over again until my time even ended up filling up so much that I ended up dying because the time ran out. It's a little bit convoluted on some of the smaller areas that we have to kind of work our way through here. I love the pinball-like thing you can spring off in order to kind of go through certain areas here. There's plenty of bumpers that end up sending you flying all over the place. Get a lot of points during this. Even though I really never cared about points in Sonic games, you can get quite a lot of points during the course of Casino Night for sure. Here we're going to drop on down and then spin dash a little bit to the right and continue on through the stage here. You kind of get used to, after a while, about how the way the bumpers work, and use them to bounce off and get to wherever you're trying to get to. I remember getting frustrated as a kid at a few areas throughout Casino Night because I would end up bouncing around so much, not trying to get to exactly where I was trying to go. Here we're just going to roll on down here, and we're going to get hit by this flipper, and that'll send us up to the top in order to finish up Casino Night Act 1. Casino Night Act 2 is just as crazy and just as fun as Act 1. I love some of the enemies introduced here, like the crab guys with the little bumper shields that they use in order to try to bounce you around. Be careful not to get squashed in a few areas here with some of the big moving blocks that are going up and down throughout the area. We can go ahead and grab another one of the speed shoes and run through a series of areas right here. Conveyor belts are no problem to us with these speed shoes. Didn't have quite enough rings in order to do that one, but I will be able to, at the end of this, be able to get that final Chaos Emerald so that from there on we will have Super Sonic. Here's one spot that a lot of people get stuck on, I used to get frustrated at, but I learned eventually, instead of trying to go right, instead bounce off the left bumper, and you'll usually get through that little opening and be able to continue on. A lot of times as a kid, I would just try to keep going forward and keep bouncing off the bumpers. Here, we end up hitting this checkpoint marker, and this gives us our 7th Chaos Emerald bonus game. This being the final one, of course, it's going to be the most difficult one, starting off immediately with 100 rings that have to be grabbed in order to finish it up and be able to even get to the second part here. It starts off with a whole bunch of the little mines in the center, and you have to keep going left and right, back and forth, in order to grab all the rings, while trying to do your best not to accidentally run into these mines, so you have to time it just right. There is a decent amount of rings during this segment, though, and hopefully Tails doesn't end up grabbing too many and end up causing you to end up failing the gate, the first gate check, because he ends up losing the rings, which has happened many times in the past to me. The second part here, we have 136 rings already, but we need to get 190 during this segment here. It starts off by going left and right with mines on one side, rings on the other, and it just keeps alternating back and forth. Unfortunately, Tails ends up taking a hit and loses all the rings that he had gathered, so thankfully I once again have a good amount where we'll be able to complete the second gate here. The third gate only requires 210, so not many more than we already have. But the way it does it is, as you can see, they just throw all the rings sporadically towards you. They're just all over the place during the segment. You then have a very tough kind of area where you have to dodge a lot of the mines. So you have to try to be careful and have as many rings as you can, because, you know, you don't want to lose any at this final segment. But thankfully, the final segment here isn't too bad. After a few more rings, you have more mines, which are a little bit hard to judge exactly where they're coming at you. After one more set of sporadic rings, though, as long as you had 210, you finish it up, and now we have all 7 Chaos Emeralds and can turn into Supersonic anytime we get over 50 rings in a level. As we drop back into Casino Night, we'll grab a couple of rings, and now it's time for the boss encounter here. The boss has always been a pretty difficult one for me. You can use the bumpers in order to flip up into Robotnik, but what I've always preferred to do is just use the left and right sides by doing spin dashes, and dash up and then jump off of the wall at the right time in order to fly across the screen and run into Robotnik. I usually end up getting hit a few times by the mines that he is dropping down on top of me, but it won't take too long before he's defeated, and we're moving on to the next zone. Next up is another personal favorite of mine, not quite as good as Casino Night, but I've always loved Hilltop Zone. Maybe it's just the song. I always thought it was a really cool song that went along with this level. Now that we have Supersonic, though, things get a lot easier, because we can basically cheese the game. Whenever you get 50 rings, when next time that you end up jumping into the air, you're going to transform into Supersonic. And once you are invincible. Nothing can harm you, other than you can still get squashed, as well as there are a few little glitches here and there that can end up happening because of it. Throughout Hilltop, you have a couple of cool enemies. I love the Nessie-like guys that are in the lava, as well as you have the gondolas that you'll be able to ride through a lot of areas. Going through here and doing the spin dash, we are able to crush through the rocks and go down into the area below, and this is where we first turn in to Supersonic. Because of this, we're able to speed through so many areas so quickly. It's basically like cheating at this point once you become Supersonic. As we begin Hilltop 2, we'll do a spin dash up on this first hill here, start heading on over to the right, go through this little area, and as we come out, we'll be able to bounce off this spring, slowly gathering our rings towards eventually becoming supersonic again. Watch out for the rotating flame guy here, very similar to one of the enemies we saw in Sonic 1. They throw the fireballs at you, you'll have to watch out for those. Here we end up going down into the cave, and the lava will start to rise up, and you have to work your way up. You want to make sure that you move quickly. You can go over here to the right and grab this invincibility box so you won't be able to get harmed by any of the lava as it's going upwards. If you have that 50 rings and we have that supersonic, we'll be able to turn into him as well during the course of the rest of this level here. When we do turn into supersonic, we're going to just drop on down into the lava below, though you can safely hit the right wall and drop straight down. You'll land safely on a platform. So keep that in mind if you don't have supersonic. But then finish up the level here. We have Robotnik, and just to make things fun, normally you have to jump on Robotnik. He'll fire straight out at you on the various platforms. And then when he goes back down, he causes fire to shoot up, hitting the platform itself and causing fire to kind of ripple across. You have to dodge out. Still a really easy fight, and you usually can take him out before he's able to even do a second set of moves, since you're able to easily jump on top of him. But as Supersonic, you can just hang out in the lava with him and take him out that way. Now next up is Mystic Cave Zone. Just so much amazing nostalgic music throughout Sonic 2. It's just unbelievable. Such a good soundtrack. Mystic Cave is a little bit difficult. You have a few new hazards thrown into the mix. You can get crushed by a few moving boxes, and then you have these things like here, where you have to grab these vines in order to open up trapdoors or to bring down walls for you to get through, and so you have to kind of keep an eye out for them. You have these platforms here with spikes on the end of them that will slowly start coming out of the wall once you get close to them and activate it, so you have to be careful that they don't end up running into you with those spikes. Be careful not to get crushed here or anything like that during those vines that are kind of shooting up out of the ground that slowly move up and then retract when they get all the way up. You can climb up here, grab onto this little handle, and that'll bring down this wall so you can be able to get up. Right after that, you want to make sure you grab the next handle, and that way you can get up here instead of going all the way to the left, which will just kind of cause you to go around in a circle, and that'll finish up Act number 1 here. It's funny, after we got Supersonic, got all the Chaos Emeralds, we're able to breeze through a lot of the levels really fast. Just because, you know, now it's just fun as we're working our way through the rest of the game here. Especially during these levels. When we get a little bit farther and we make it to Metropolis Zone, things get slowed down a bit because of just how hectic that level is. But we can get through a lot of these levels here before that pretty quickly. Drop on down here, you can grab some rings as well as another invincibility box located here, so you have that. You have to be careful though, because coming up is the dreaded Endless Pit. Basically, if you can fall down it, you will end up dying. There's no way to get out of the pit, so you have to be very careful when traversing through Act 2 here, and that includes even with Supersonic. So you want to make sure that you hit these platforms and don't fall down into those pits. I know I went really fast through that, I know. But you have to be very careful with them. You can fall down there and you're stuck. Even as Supersonic, you basically just have to wait it out until Supersonic runs out and you end up dying. What's really cool though is in the mobile version of Sonic 2, you actually can go down those endless pits and take you to Hidden Palace Zone, which was a cut level from the original Sonic 2. So that's kind of a really cool little extra they added to that version. For Robotnik here, which we have Supersonic, so we're going to take him out easily, he comes down from the ceiling, he'll then move across with his drill, and then he goes back up into the ceiling with the drill, and when he does, all these spikes will start falling down from the ceiling as the ground shakes, and then a few seconds later, he'll end up coming back down, and you're able to repeat the process, and eventually take him out. The next two zones, Metropolis Zone and Oil Ocean that we're in now, are my least favorites of the game. I've never been a huge fan of Oil Ocean, though the music's still cool, and still kind of a cool vibe to it. I just never really like the overall design. I don't really like a whole lot of industrial style of levels in classic platformers. You have a whole bunch of new threats You have bridges that'll break apart. You have these little fans that blow and have Sonic where he can kind of float over gaps. You have these seahorses that will consistently fire out projectiles from them. As well as you have this weird thing that will shoot you up, and you go through a series of contraptions, basically, and it will kind of send you into different areas of the level, and you'll see that more as we get a little bit farther in. You also have these platforms that shoot up with the fire below them, and you can ride the platform up into the air. Taking a series of oil slides downwards, we make it down to this section, and we're going to use this platform as a boost up in order to continue on through the area here. Because we have such huge jumps with Supersonic, we're able to get through a lot of these areas fast and don't even have to wait for platforms to kind of catch up with us. You can get invincibility here if you want to, if you're not having Supersonic. And then these are the things I was talking about earlier, where you kind of get blasted through a series of contraptions and end up landing out of it safely in different areas of the stage. Just kind of a cool little thing that's in this particular zone. Here, though, we're going to hit this and get sent into another series of these, and this will lead us to where we need to go and to the end of Act number 1 here. We just have to finish up the rest of this area. Oil Ocean Act 2 is more of the same here, with more octopus enemies and seahorses that are floating in the air. Plenty more platforms for us to ride as well. Here we're going to jump on this platform, and it'll go up into this machine that will then send us through these series of sphere objects and land us safely on this platform. Watch out for some spikes that are moving across these open areas right here. You'll have 2 of them during this segment. They kind of cling off of each other and go the opposite direction, so be careful when you're going over that. Right after that, though, you'll ride down an oil slick, making it to the next little area here. Here we're going to once again hit one of these devices that will send us through another series of sphere objects to land us. You can actually blast straight up into the air and grab a lot of rings if you want to do so during that. Be careful of the fan here, just keep kind of going forward. You can do a spin dash to help you in order to kind of get through that little spot there. When we get control of Sonic and land, we're going to go to the left a little bit and use this platform to ride upwards. That will take us eventually to this, where we can once again blast up into the air and get bounced around a whole bunch. Once on the platform, you have 2 choices, you can go left or right, but we're going to go right to make sure that we're able to continue on in the level. You have a couple more oil slicks that will kind of send you down into a few areas, which will lead us to the boss encounter against Robotnik. Now this boss is a little difficult, though we can take him out by just kind of bouncing on top of him. You can get a lot of hits in before he descends down into the oil. Once he does so, he'll then spin a giant spike that will kind of fly out, as you can see, in an arcing pattern that you can easily dodge, and then he has this laser that comes out and will fire at you. You'll have to jump over the laser, and if the laser hits the platform you're standing on, it causes this ripple effect of fire. After that, though, the laser retreats, and then you can finish off Robotnik with a few more hits, and we're moving on to Metropolis Zone. Oh boy, Metropolis Zone. Metropolis Zone is 3 acts, unlike the other levels in the game, as we've seen, that had 2. It is a very difficult overall stage, very mechanical themed, and some difficult enemies. You have starfish that, when you get close to them, will activate and explode. Crabs with a giant arm, or giant claw, that they're able to send flying towards you and can sometimes have a little bit tricky hit detection. And then the mantis enemies that, when you get close, they will send out their blade that will then kind of chase you around and then come back. Even if you go past, it will kind of boomerang back towards you. And because of this, it can be difficult to sometimes get away from it. It can follow you for a little bit of time as well. Along with all that, you have a few other hazards that you have to deal with. You have these bumpers that you can bounce on. You have these giant like screws that you have to run on in order to get them to go upwards, which can be difficult to do so in the non-supersonic form when you have like the starfish as well as the mantises on the left and right sides that can hit you while going up and get knocked back to the bottom and have to redo this part. Supersonic can also glitch a little bit in Metropolis Zone. There are these teleporters that you can use that will kind of like take you from one little area and then quickly boost you to another area, like right here. If you go too fast into them, I found that you can sometimes fall through them as supersonic, so be careful of that if you are supersonic in these levels. Here we're going to ride this platform over to the far right side. Thankfully we're near the end of this act. We're just going to run across a couple more areas and moving on to Act 2. These levels can also be relatively long. Thankfully, having supersonic speeds them up a bit, so I don't really mind running through them as much as I do without the supersonic version. Be careful, that crab always hits me. No matter how many times I have played this game, that crab right there near that lava pit usually ends up running into me. Here we're going to use these gears and we can kind of work our way down. You can get a shield monitor located in the left corner here. You do have a couple of little paths. You can do a little bit of deviation throughout Metropolis Zone, but I usually end up kind of taking the same basic path every time that I end up playing through Metropolis Zone, with my main goal just being to get through it as quick as I possibly can and get on to the next levels. Use the spring and then you can use the screw to get up, and then we're going to wait for this thing to shoot up and it'll knock us up into the air, which will allow us to get to these platforms above. Another crab enemy that can be a little bit difficult to dodge because you're in a really close quarters around them, but thankfully we have the shield so that we're able to keep our rings and then turn into supersonic right after that. Another hazard that this level loves is these squares that have spears coming out of each side. They go in a circle, thankfully, clockwise, so they're easy to know when the spear is going to go out of the next platform, but you still have to make sure you're a little bit careful with them. Well, if you're not supersonic, that is. After bouncing up a few more of these little bumpers, we run to the right, finishing up Act 2 and moving on to the third act. More fun as Metropolis Act 3 ends up beginning. Thankfully a lot of rings right at the very start. Another crab that I usually end up getting hit by. Thankfully he didn't end up hitting me this time around, but that one usually ends up doing damage to me as well. Be careful I don't get crushed by these, as they will shoot up very fast, those big gray crusher things. When you're riding up these screws, here's what normally happens. As you can see, you have the starfish on the left and right sides that activate and send out that 5-shot spread shot, so you have to make sure that you're able to avoid all of the needles that end up shooting off of it. Not too far into the level that we end up getting enough rings to become supersonic once again. Thankfully, this allows us to run through a couple of these areas. Another crab, like right there, right on the edge of that platform, waiting to grab you. You want to be very careful here, because if you ride that thing up too far, there's spikes right at the ceiling there, can end up causing you to die instantly. Because instead of just a spike hitting you, it counts as being crushed, so you have to be very careful with that. Run to the left, we're going to hit the switch and drop down. You don't want to move too fast here so you end up falling, but you're going to ride this platform over to the right side. Here we have another giant screw, and this one has to go really far up. If you end up getting knocked off of this one, you have to do a long way to get back up here, especially without Supersonic, because you're going to go much slower, and it'll take a while in order to get all the way up during this segment. Here's an example of me kind of glitching. Like I said, if you go too fast out of it, you'll end up falling through. Thankfully, it doesn't kill me when that happens, but still a little bit of an annoyance. Make sure I grab these rings, because I'd be really careful here. I'm fighting Robotnik, and this is a really tough Robotnik fight. He has a bunch of rotating spheres around him that cause clones to appear. I'm going to keep attacking him, and every time you attack him, the spheres become little mini Robotniks that bounce around. Normally, you basically get a chance to hit one, and then you'll knock him up into the air and then repeat the process, but as Supersonic, we can jump so high up, we're able to hit him multiple times in order to destroy all of the clones before our Supersonic ability runs out. When you've gotten rid of all the clones and hit him 7 times, the 8th time he'll start moving around and firing giant laser blasts at you, so you have to be careful of those. Thankfully though, with Metropolis Zone done, that nightmare is over, and now we move on to Sky Chase, which is one of the best levels in all of classic Sonic. It's a nice calming, more relaxing stage. It's, slower moving, because, it is a automatic kind of scrolling level, but it's such a nice change of pace from having to do Metropolis Zone, and it also has, once again, amazing music to go along with it. The level is pretty basic, though you can still become Supersonic during the course of it if you gather enough rings to do so. You have turtles riding turtle mech platform things. You have jets, basically, I guess, sentient, alive jet plane-like guys that are coming towards you. And then you have these weird little guys, these capsule egg-looking guys that kind of spin around. They do drop mines out of the bottom part of it that can end up hurting you, so you have to be a little bit careful when going underneath of them. You also, every time you defeat an enemy in Sonic 2, you of course free an animal friend. I don't know where the animals go in this one. I don't know, it's kind of a morbid thing to think about. Hopefully they land safely in some kind of giant safe netting. But since you're flying in the air, it's like, I wonder where all these animals end up falling once you end up taking out the enemies. Here we get to see Wing Fortress, the giant Robotnik flying machine that we're going to be actually going all through during the next level. We get to pass that as we're going to the second part here of Sky Chase Zone. The second part of this level is a little bit more challenging than the first one, with more groups of enemies, but it's still fun to kind of not only work your way around them, but bounce off of multiple enemies in a row. Just have to be careful though, because of the way it's set up. Sometimes when you're bouncing on those multiple enemies, you can accidentally land on top of an enemy without doing a jump and spin, and you'll end up getting hit. Near the end of the stage, though, I do end up becoming Supersonic for a very brief moment before we now end up at Wing Fortress Zone. Now, this level is pretty difficult. This is the final level of the game before Death Egg, which is basically just the final 2 boss encounters. This is also a level that doesn't really benefit a whole lot from being Supersonic, other than the boss of it, because some jumps are just very difficult. Be very careful here with these launchers, and when you land on these little hanging things, you have to wait a few moments for the platform to come over. Make sure you're as far to the right on them before jumping to the moving, rotating platforms or whatever, because you may accidentally miss the jump and fall down. You'll have a few enemies that will kind of pop out and try to fire their cannons at you, and you also have cannons on the ship itself that are going to fire at you. Just to the left, I become Supersonic, and I jump way far to the left, which allows me to get a couple of rings as well as a speed up. You need to jump on these little platforms when they're, of course, flat and going straight, so that you'll be able to jump on them and then get up to the top part of the ship. Here we're able to gather a whole bunch more rings, as well as we have to ride these conveyor belt platforms upwards so we can get to the top portion here. From here, we run all the way to the right over a lot of area. We can kind of get on top and kind of get through a large portion of the ship pretty easily. You have these boosts that will kind of send you flying over to the right side. Once here, climb up a little bit of platforming, and you'll make it to the end straight up here against the boss. There are some really other areas that are pretty hard that I end up skipping because of the Supersonic ability, but that just makes the platforming a tad bit easier. For this boss, and it's a pretty tough fight overall, you have these 3 rotating little spike platforms that can hurt you if they run into you, as well as this giant laser that will fire out and move across. You want to attack it, of course, when the laser is not firing, and once it's defeated though, you're moving on to Death Egg, the final level of the game. When we arrive in Death Egg, we don't have any rings. You don't have any rings whatsoever throughout this level, making it you have to fight the final bosses without Super Sonic, as well as just having any protection. We start off by fighting Mecha Sonic, who will turn into a spike ball after a few seconds and roll across to the left. You have to hit him 8 times still, and it's fairly easy to kind of take him out early. After he does the spin, he'll then do a dash just straight across, and you can still hurt him during this. And then he'll also turn into another spike ball and go across the screen again that you have to watch out for. But I try to take him out before he even gets done his first set of moves. Once Mecha Sonic is done though, you then have to fight the giant Eggman robot. This is the final boss of the game. You have to jump up to attack him, which can be difficult to hit him because you jump a little bit too short. You're going to run into his spiky arms. Or, what sometimes can happen is if you hit him and bounce off of him, when you do hit him, you'll end up kind of like just going a little bit off and end up landing on the spike after delivering a hit to him. The way to counteract this and make sure that you don't end up getting hit is to always hold back, whatever the opposite direction of the robot is, when you do jump up to hit him. This way you're guaranteed to avoid his spiky hands. A big part of this battle, though, will be him kind of going up into the air. After a few seconds, his targeting system will lock on and he'll crash down. When he lands, he'll end up kind of moving forward a little bit, allowing you to hit him. He'll then send his arms out at you, so you want to make sure he's far away so you can easily get away from his arms when they do end up launching out. He'll then do the same thing again when he goes up into the air, and then when he comes back down this time, he'll actually start walking again a few steps before then going once again back into the air and repeating this over and over again. You can end up behind him, but if you do, he'll end up firing little bombs out of his back towards you, so you want to be careful of that. Once he is defeated, though, which does take more hits than the normal Robotnik fight, you get to sit back and enjoy the ending to Sonic 2. So there you have it, guys. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I guess this is technically 100% because I got all of the Chaos Emeralds along the journey. Sonic 2 is forever my favorite Sonic game. I don't think any Sonic game could ever become my favorite after playing Sonic 2. So much nostalgia, my favorite soundtrack, some of my favorite levels, even with Metropolis Zone. Like, if I could just get rid of Metropolis Zone and replace it with one or two of the other levels from, like, Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles, and just make this game, like, the perfect Sonic game overall for me. But I still absolutely love playing through it, and I probably still play through it at least 3 or 4 times every year. Usually not 100%. I usually don't go after all the Chaos Emeralds. I still prefer to play it without that and just play through the levels. But still, just an absolute blast to play this game. One thing I always love during the credits is they have that medley of all the different songs. You get to hear like bits and pieces of all the music throughout the course of the game. So it's like nostalgia within a nostalgic game here as you're listening to all of that as you're going through this credit sequence. As the credits wrap up, we get our Presented by Sega screen, and then one last look at the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 logo. From here, though, you can press start, and you can go back to the main title screen, and you can start the game all over again. But with that, guys, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.